Today for Devotions with Daniella, we are reading from Uncultured, my book about growing up in the Children of God religious cult, going into the cult of the U.S. Army. This is a chapter called You're Not James Bond, and I have just finished U.S. Army Officer Spy School, Intelligence Officer. No, I've just finished Officer School, and I'm heading to Spy School. Too soon, leave was over, and I waved to my family from the rearview mirror. I kept driving to Sierra Vista, both a relatively small town and one of the larger cities in Arizona, right at the Mexico border. I arrived at Fort Huachuca, U.S. Army Intelligence Center of Excellence, or Spy School, as we all called it, where we would learn how to think red, to get inside the heads of the bad guys, the others, to play the enemy in war games and become part of a time-honored tradition of predicting where they might be hiding so that our combat forces could do their thing. Y'all have been studying the bad guys for a long time. Which is how I found myself months later, incredulous as I looked around the room, watching American officer after American officer defend the concept of torturing other human beings. I had been 16 in 2003 when the torture at the American-run Iraqi prisoner of war camp, Abu Ghraib, made international headlines. At the time, I'd been drowning in my first year of high school and trying to figure out life outside the cult, so I only had the vaguest memories of the incident. But I took it all in as I saw those pictures for the first time on a giant screen in front of me, as the captain at the front of the room talked about the difference between what had been defined by the Bush administration as enhanced interrogation techniques. Things like stress positions, sleep deprivation, and the infamous waterboarding, versus what he called real torture. Torture was what bad guys did, like cutting off fingers and pulling out teeth. We didn't do that stuff. We were the good guys. We were always the good guys. But I couldn't see a difference. I looked around the room and felt certain none of these people had ever spent any time in endless isolation. Maybe it was easy to call stress positions humane when you'd never had to hold the King James Bible in your outstretched arms for an unspecified period of time before you were even old enough to read it. Maybe they had never been subjected to days of imposed silence where you have nothing to do but chew your own skin and sift through your own thoughts. They didn't know that hunger, sleep deprivation, uncertainty, and horror will get people to say anything, do anything to make it stop. Y'all wonder why I'm always knitting? Spent a lot of time in solitary confinement. Well, as one of the few of us who's always been to war, said one of the prior service lieutenants who'd crossed over from being a staff sergeant and already had years of experience as an interrogator, which he reminded us of in every conversation. I can promise you that these are bad guys. If I have to torture 1,000 innocent people in order to save one American life, I'll do it. No questions. I studied one face to the next, nodding in agreement and mumbling confirmation of their righteous rage at anyone who dared to not be an American. How was it possible that 9 out of 10 most intelligent, competitive, best of their class Army officers were casually and publicly expressing their belief that torture is justified for any reason, not to mention against the innocent? But I knew it was part of why I never really felt at home, never American enough. I hadn't gotten the same indoctrination as everyone else growing up. America does what the Army does, just at a larger and more insidious scale. The programming begins at birth. America is the greatest country on earth. We are the best, down with all the rest, and if we have to torture 1,000 innocent people to prove it, so be it. When you believe you're the best, the chosen ones, then the end can always be made to justify the means. That day, I promised myself that I wouldn't hate groups of people. I'd seen where that could lead. I knew I couldn't share that out loud. There was no room for disagreement in that crowd. Looking over at the prior service lieutenant who'd spoken, I briefly wondered how he would respond if I stood up and said, well, as one of the few of us who's experienced torture here. But my words stuck in my throat, and I thought this would be a secret I'd have to keep to myself for the time being. I won't hate groups of people, I repeated to myself. Not the Afghans, not the Iraqis, not those we partnered with who ended up betraying us. not even the terrorists. Sure, a year's worth of nonstop training was starting to make its way into my brain, programming me alongside my peers. But I, at least, knew it was happening. And knowing it was happening meant I could draw some lines in the sand. Lines that I'd know not to let the group pull me across. As I made my way through spy school, embedded in studying countercultures, I realized that this was all nothing but a bet. A conviction based on blind faith at best, narcissistic delusion at worst. We weren't inherently better than anyone. I knew that for a fact. By serving in the army and going to war, we were betting our side was the right side. Looking around the room was a game of Russian roulette. I knew that some of us might die for that bet. And I found myself asking the big question in spy school that wasn't on any test. How does a scholar, a strategist, or a soldier understand a culture well enough to predict future outcomes without being willing to understand that all humans, from their own perspective, are living a truth and reality as valid as ours? You can get signed copies of Uncultured attached here, or listen to me read it to you on Spotify Premium or anywhere else you get your audiobooks.